Hi, I'm Tom Luna. I'm a former school board member. I was privileged to serve as senior advisor to U.S. Secretary of Education Rod Page. I also had the honor of serving for 8 years as Idaho State Superintendent of Public Instruction. During that time, I also served as president of the Council of Chief State School Officers. One thing I have learned in all these experiences is that educating children is not rocket science, it's more complicated. On my podcast, Swimming Upstream, we will visit with courageous leaders who challenge the prevailing tide and inspire all of us to swim against the current. Let's jump in. Welcome back to another episode of Swimming Upstream. I'm Tom Luna, your host, and we're here at Excel in Ed conference in Oklahoma City. And this gives us an opportunity to meet with education leaders from around the country. And we're really excited to have Chad Aldis with us. Chad, you're with the Fordham Foundation, and you do great work around the country. And so we're just honored to have you here at the beginning of our third season of Swimming Upstream. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Great. Let's first start talking a little bit about you and your background. Then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the Fordham Foundation, because I think people have heard the name, but maybe we'll do a little bit deeper dive of how they operate, where they focus most of their work. But first, tell us about your journey to being a vice president at the Fordham Foundation.
Yeah, so like many people, I think, who find themselves in education, if they didn't come from the teaching ranks, if they come from a non-traditional route, I would have never predicted this in a million years. I went to law school at Florida State, got out, worked for state government for a while, and during my time working for the legislature, education under the governorship of Jeb Bush was really making things happen. I got an opportunity out of the blue to join the education committee in the House as a staff person, learned a lot, and then moved over to the Department of Education, where I ran the state's voucher programs for 2.5 years.
Well, then you know our good friend Jim Horn, who was the commissioner there and who's a partner at the Stratos Group. Yeah, great. Keep going. Tell us more. So,
and then after, looking at my career at that time, I was 10 years out of law school, and I'd only worked for state government. And I thought, to really get a full picture of education, I should have a bigger experience and a broader experience. So around that time, I was approached by someone who led the voucher advocacy group School Choice Ohio. It was a board member of the organization who said, we would love to have you come to Ohio and be our executive director. So I got to move from the government side of education to the nonprofit side. And so I've been at various nonprofits over the past 10 or 12 years now, including School Choice Ohio, the Walton Family Foundation, and now the Thomas B. Fordham Institute.
Yeah, so a lot of focus on school choice then.
I started in school choice. One of the things I like about Fordham, and I'm sure we get into that more later, but Fordham looks overall at how do you improve educational outcomes for all students. Yeah. And so school choice is one of the levers, but it's not the only lever.
There's more. Yeah, great. So talk to us about, before we talk about some of the specifics that the foundation focuses on, just the foundation itself, I guess the genesis of it, and where its work actually geographically is focused.
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting story. The Thomas B. Fordham was a Dayton industrialist who died in the mid-50s. He'd made a lot of money, but he was very young. He left his trust to his wife, his widow, who got remarried fairly quickly afterward and was making little grants around the Dayton community in Dayton, Ohio, to support things and projects that she liked. When she passed away, I guess it was in the mid-90s, the trustees sat down and thought, how could they have the biggest impact possible with Mr. Fordham and Mrs. Fordham's estate?
Fortune,
yeah. And so what they've done is they have worked really hard on improving educational outcomes, as I mentioned earlier, for all students. But we do have a focus in Ohio because of the Fordham's role there, historic role.
And quite an influential role around the country, even though the work is primarily focused in Ohio. I know when I was state superintendent in Idaho during those 8 years, there was a lot of good information, a lot of studies, a lot of data that was being made available to state leaders, education leaders around the country. And we appreciate that work, and that work continues. I want to talk to you a bit about the focus on school choice, but we'll get back to that, because like you said, there are other things that the Fordham Foundation has focused on, and one of those is academic standards, right? And talk about that, why standards are so important, and the level of rigor in those standards.
Yeah, Fordham has focused on standards before discussing standards was either cool or controversial. So one of the first reports that Fordham's national office, which is based in D.C., ever wrote was about learning standards and English standards. And so they wrote that in the late 90s, which was a good 15 years before, or 10 years before we started talking about the Common Core, which is, of course, a type of learning standard. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that the rigor of standards are so important. If these are going to be the goals that we want students to move toward, then we need to make sure that they're high enough to get the results, to have students have the opportunities we all want them to have.
Yeah.
And so if a state has low standards, even achieving them might not position students for success.
Yeah.
And so that's been a big part of Fordham's work over the last 25 years.
When you look at the academic standards that are the goal of even surrounding states where you may live, or even more importantly, other countries, to think that we would have our kids, and the goal is to meet an academic standard that was less than was expected of the people they're going to compete with when they all become adults.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right. And we've had some improvements over the last 10 years on our standards. We probably actually still need to have more improvements. We still need to have higher bars. There's been a lot of talk at this conference about math and the importance of math. And post-pandemic, we still see students around the country struggling with math. And I don't know if that's as much a standards issue as a rigor issue, as a practice issue. And there's still so much work to do to ensure that students are ready for the jobs that we see coming that are more tech-focused.
Yeah, where do you see the kind of educational opportunities that are provided kids with their their desire to perform at a higher level? And my point is, we were talking earlier to a state superintendent, and we talked about the fact that when kids see relevance to what they're learning, rigor will take care of itself. But if they don't see relevance, it's very difficult for kids to get the kids to perform at their highest level. Yeah. And so we high standards, rigorous standards. What can the education system itself do to encourage kids to take advantage and see value in those higher standards?
Well, I think your point about relevance is important, but I also think, and I'm a bit of an old curmudgeon, I guess, on this issue. There are things you do in life that you don't like. It doesn't matter if you don't like doing math. If the expectations are you do your math homework every night and you come prepared to the next day at school and you're held to those standards, it's amazing with a little bit of grumbling how quickly kids can adapt. But that has to be the attitude of the adults in the room too.
Yeah. So the life, being prepared for life, and those kinds of characteristics that we can give to kids when they're in the school system also are important. I know the Fordham Foundation has focused on the quality of teachers in the classroom and how important their role is.
Yeah, as everyone knows, I think the quality of the teacher is probably the most important factor for students' long-term success. Certainly in the school level, outside of their parents.
Once kids enter the school, it's the quality of the teacher. I think it was a study done, Bob Marzano, did his study, thousands of kids over a 20-year period of time. What was the most important factor in their success? And the size of the classroom was important, the amount of money that's spent per kid is important, the curriculum is important, but by far the most important factor is the quality of the teacher in the classroom. And too many times we leave that to chance, right?
We do. And with all of the controversy, I guess, over the last 10 years about what's being taught in classrooms, about teacher shortages, about you can tick off a list of various factors affecting teaching that has made it probably a less attractive field for a lot. And I think that's one of the challenges we have for policymakers, to figure out how to make teaching make sure it continues to be the noble profession that some of our best and brightest graduates go into. And too often we've struggled to attract to attract some of our best students into teaching. And so that we need to continue that focus and make teaching, as it should be, one of the best jobs in the community.
Yeah, I agree. When you talk about the quality of an education system, preparing kids for the future that awaits them, the accountability system is going to have a lot of impact on that. And I believe that accountability systems, they trump, you can have a great school goals, you can have a number of projects and efforts that you're working on, but all of that is going to be secondary to whatever the accountability system is, because what you measure is what people are going to focus on. Right. So we see a number of states that are looking at updating their accountability systems and looking at putting weight where it's the most important in a child's academic success.
Well, and you may be a little more optimistic than I am related to accountability systems. I think they're critical, and I think in too many states, when they've been going in to make changes recently, they've been making them softer and making it easier. In an era where everyone gets a participation trophy, I don't think our educational system can be structured in the same way.
Yeah.
Going back to where we started our conversation, we have to have standards, and we need to accurately judge and gauge whether we're reaching those standards. Yeah. And too often, accountability systems want to make every school or every district feel good. And what's most important is those schools and districts are performing at a level that students have every opportunity for success. And sometimes that means looking at some uncomfortable truths.
So talk about what are the recommendations, or your studies show that are the measures in an accountability system and the weight that's put behind them, which are the right kinds of standards with the right kind of weight that are going to assure that our kids are ready for the world that awaits them, and isn't based on everybody gets a trophy.
That's right. Well, I think I would probably highlight three things, and this is as much art as science, which makes it really hard, which also allows the space for reducing standards related to or in accountability. And that is, I would say, first off, you do have to look at proficiency. Are they hitting their grade level standards? What does the achievement measure look like? Next, you also need to look at growth. Yeah. Because in certain schools that are getting lots of students that are well below grade level, their overall proficiency standards may be good, but they may struggle, but they might be helping kids catch up. They're just tremendous. They're just not there yet. Yeah. And then the third thing is, I do think we need to be smart about our college and career readiness indicators, and about how we gauge whether at the end of the day, all of the tests we take in grades 3 through 8 in the U.S. and in high school are designed to measure how students are, whether they're on track or not, whether the schools are doing a good job in preparing them. But at the end of the day, what we really want is, it's not your math or English score. It's whether you're prepared when you leave high school for whatever challenge you want to take on next. Right. So we need a meaningful college and career readiness indicator and for things that we really know that kids need to be successful at the next level.
Yeah, what you measure becomes important, and what you and so you better be measuring the right things. That's right? And or what you do measure will be, if you're measuring things that aren't important, they will become important, right? They're the ones that people will focus on because that's what you're measuring. Okay, let's wrap this up talking about what the work that I'm most familiar with, the Fordham Foundation and their leadership in when it comes to school choice. Yeah. And you mentioned your background in Florida and then in Ohio, focusing on school choice, but talk about the benefits of it, why it's a critical part of a quality education system.
Well, if you look all around the country, school choice is certainly on the move.
Yes.
There are both private school choice and public charter schools continue to grow and thrive and prosper. Fordham has long argued that families should have the opportunity to select the best school for their child. But one of the ways I think that's important to note is when you look at Fordham's body of work, we also think quality matters. So it's not just choice for choice's sake, but that students have access to high quality schools that'll really make a difference for those students. So, we continue to support choice, and there should be a wide availability of options. But at the same time, we need to make sure we're measuring to see how well students are doing, whether those schools are actually helping students to be successful. And that needs to be information that moms and dads have as they're selecting a school.
So many choices in education, but the ones that we support and want more of are the ones that are preparing kids for the world that awaits them. Just because it's a school of choice doesn't necessarily mean that it's a better educational opportunity.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and talk about rural America when it comes to school choice, and also maybe a little bit broader. Coming from Idaho, which most of our state is rural. Some of it's considered isolated and remote, right? So which is even smaller than rural. But a lot of the issues that we deal with in rural America are similar to the ones that we see in inner city when it comes to academic opportunities, the quality of teachers in the classroom, the course offerings and stuff. Talk about rural America in education.
Yeah, and I think it presents some challenges, especially as you're talking in the school choice side, because if there's a limited number of students, you can't really have the economies of scale to stand up other students. And that then goes back to making sure that the rural schools are judged by the same or evaluated by the same standards that all schools in the state are, so we know whether they have the resources they need to provide the education, and state funding formulas need to make sure that happens. But then at the same time, we also need to make sure that rural schools, we have accountability for results and transparency. I mean, there are times when, especially if there are no choices nearby or other options, then you're going to need to have interventions necessary when schools are not doing that, and leaders have to have the gumption to be able to do that. And it's not easy if you have to come in and help a local school district take it to the next level so the students there benefit. But if you turn a blind eye to it, then you can lose generations of students.
Yeah, I mean, a second grader is going to be a third grader next year, or a third grader is going to be a fourth grader. These kids aren't going to wait, right, while the adults in the system try to figure out what changes need to be made, or even when they know what changes need to be made, dragging their feet to do them, right? When you put the child first, the student first, then the urgency becomes hopefully more than obvious. So let's wrap up with this. First, I want to thank you for being on the podcast today and for all your great work at the Fordham Foundation and the work you've done previously. But we always like to ask our guests one thing. Share with us a piece of trivia or information about your state, Ohio, that most people wouldn't know and would be interesting for them.
Well, this might be a little bit of a simple trivia question because there are only probably 3 good options. But if you're talking to people who haven't been to Ohio, and you ask them, what's the biggest city in Ohio? And most will say Cleveland. Some will say Cincinnati, but it's Columbus, and it's not even close.
Really?
Okay. So in terms of now metro areas and that, it gets more complicated. But in terms of the city size, Columbus is now the 15th largest city in the country.
I think that's news.
There we go.
Yeah, that's an interesting piece of trivia. Hey, Chad, thank you so much for being on Swimming Upstream, and look forward to maybe doing this again and learning more about the Fordham Foundation and the great work it's doing in Ohio and across the country. But
sounds great.
Thank you so much for being
with us. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening. And remember, our children may only be 22% of our population, but they represent 100% of our future. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on your favorite podcast platform. Swimming Upstream is part of the Strategos Podcast Network. To view the entire lineup of our shows, visit our website, strategosgroup.com.